Hey, this is Mr. Nason again with part two. Excuse me, let me quit mail here. Of our lessons on oceanography and looking at our top 5 things. The first thing we're going to start with is this idea of theories and truth. And if we back up a little bit, we have here your familiar scientific method, where we first observe or see something. So, for example, we could see that the Earth has oceans and that they are 70% of the Earth and they're full of salt and animals and plants, and we can make hypotheses about how did all that stuff get there? How did the oceans get on the Earth? How did all the animals get there? How did the salt get in there? And we could test those ideas, and after doing this over and over and over again, then we might develop a theory. How did the oceans get here? How did the salt get there? How did the animals get there? And notice that this theory, as we go on to the next page, okay, a theory is not a truth. Theories are things that are ever changing, but they don't change usually a lot during time. Sometimes there are big, huge discoveries where theories get erased and start over again. In fact, we're going to learn about one of those next time we meet. But for example, the theory of gravity has changed quite a bit over the last 50 years, 100 years, and it continues to change. But that doesn't mean that if I drop a baseball from the top of a building, it's still going to fall down and it's still going to go at a certain rate. So we're starting today with kind of like how did all the oceans get here? And we're going to tell that story through theory, because no one was around when this started about 8 billion years ago. So we have to look at our observations and come up with guesses or hypotheses and test these in order to come up with our theories or our story about how the Earth got here. And remember, our theory is also going to help us predict what's going to happen in the future. So our story begins with this big cloud in space called a nebula. And you can see that there are stars here. So this cloud is huge. If you could travel at the speed of light, it might take you 10 years to cross this whole thing, maybe 20, maybe 50 years to cross this entire nebula. The nebula is made out of very simple atoms, hydrogen and helium. And what happens over time is that the hydrogen and helium are attracted to each other through the very weak force of gravity. But over millions and billions of years, gravity starts making stuff bigger in the center, and that attracts more and more gravity. And as it condenses, as it shrinks to the middle, it then starts to spin. And this is where we get the planets rotating around this, which will be the sun or the star in the center. So then we have this flattened disk. Before it was a big three-dimensional cloud. Now it's into a flattened disk that's spinning. The center forms the sun or the star in the center of our solar system. And each one of these tracks here is accumulating or gathering more and more materials, which will form the planets. Now, I know it's kind of hard to see on here. Let me see if I can zoom in a little on this. It's kind of getting pixelated. But you can see here, this is the sun, and the first 4 planets, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. Maybe that's Mars. These are the rocky planets, and they're made out of the heaviest stuff. The sun blew away all the gases, and those form the outer planets called the gas giants, which is one of your homework questions. So homework question, I believe, number 2 or 3, what are the gas giants? They are Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And that's basically the size of the planets that we have today. All right, let's move on. So now we're going back in time to about 4 or 5 billion years ago when the Earth was first formed. And you can see from this picture we talked about that the moon, it wasn't really any bigger, but it was a lot closer to Earth than it is today. And there's no pretty blue sky. The sky is black, maybe orange, maybe yellow. We have all these rocks or meteors or comets slamming into the Earth. We have volcanoes. And this is not a place that you would want to visit. You would not want to come back in time 4.5 billion years ago. First off, it was way too hot. You probably would have burned up. And second, there was no oxygen to breathe. There was no air, and there was no water around the surface of the Earth. So this is our first early Earth. It had no oceans. So where did the water come from? I'm going to skip all this fun stuff here. Oh, lots of stuff we're skipping. A lot of stuff we're skipping here. And the idea is that we had this outgassing, which basically means gas comes out of the Earth, including water vapor, carbon dioxide, hydrogen, and other gases. And as this water vapor starts to condense, then it starts to rain, and then it forms lakes, and then rivers, and then finally, over millions and billions of years, it forms oceans. Some of the water may have come from asteroids or comets, more comets. Asteroids are rocks, but comets, which are mostly ice, if you've got enough of them, they can contribute to the oceans too. So our third point is the early Earth had no oceans until water vapor came out of volcanoes and came from comets, started to rain, which formed rivers, lakes, streams, and finally the oceans. Now, the first living things on Earth were very simple. They were things like the green algae that you see in fish tanks, very primitive forms of life. And what they do, which is the answer to question, I believe, number 4, is something called photosynthesis. Photosynthesis. So what they are doing is they're taking some of these chemicals we learned about back here. They're taking carbon dioxide and water, and they, with the sun's energy, they're turning that into sugar, and then they're also turning that into oxygen. They're not making oxygen because they want to be nice to us. We didn't exist 3.5 billion years ago. They're making oxygen just, it was the leftover stuff from photosynthesis. And all that oxygen starts building up in the environment, in the atmosphere. And over billions of years, the oxygen level finally gets to a level where animals can start breathing in oxygen and using that to burn food. So now we have some of the very first animals. Again, nothing like dinosaurs or anything big, but little like one-celled things. Think about like plankton from SpongeBob. So he eats the other things. I know he eats Krabby Patties, but if he were to eat a Krabby Patty, he would eat the Krabby Patty and then burn that food with oxygen. All right, and that's called photosynthesis. So we have these algae that are cranking out oxygen. It's just waste they make, just like the same way we burp or that gases come out of our car when we burn fuel. And that oxygen builds up in the atmosphere. It makes this stuff called ozone, which protects us from ultraviolet radiation, ultraviolet light. And then we have the first animals on Earth, again, which were very simple. Okay, so this is called the, let's get to it over here. So this is photosynthesis. Again, photosynthesis is where we take the sun's energy and turn carbon dioxide and water into sugar and oxygen. Okay, and that allows animals to do the opposite, which is to burn food with oxygen and turn it back into water and carbon dioxide. Okay, and there's photosynthesis and then respiration. You'll see they're the same things, they just go in different directions. All right, And then finally, our last point is that all this oxygen builds up, and about 2.5 billion years ago, there's so much oxygen that it allows animals to start to come along, but it kills off lots and lots of bacteria, which are called anaerobes. An anaerobe is a living thing that does not like oxygen. Oxygen ends up killing it. So as you can see here, light and oxygen kills the anaerobes. There's a different type of bacteria called cyanobacteria. This means that these are blue-green. Cyan is a color that means blue-green. So blue-green bacteria or blue-green algae that have a way of adapting to oxygen, and they end up thriving. Okay, and then we can see from, well, we're not going to worry about that chart too much. But over time, the oxygen levels build up, and then that allows all sorts of living things to come on Earth. All right, so that is it for today. Again, our big 5 points. Scientific theory is a story. It tells us about what happened in the past and what will happen. Theories do change, but they take a lot of work to get to a theory. The Earth started out as a big cloud, along with the rest of our solar system, and that formed the sun and the planets. The early Earth had no oceans. The water came from volcanoes and water that came out of the rocks, and then that allowed the first life forms, which were things like this: phytoplankton, plant plankton that live in the oceans, and they start producing oxygen and adding that to the atmosphere. All right. Thank you. Have a good day.